US President Joe Biden has given the green light for Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia. Earlier, Russia targeted energy infrastructure in a large-scale overnight attack across Ukraine, which also hit civilian buildings. At least 10 people have been killed in the strikes, and President Zelenskyy says 120 missiles and 90 drones were launched during a massive combined strike on all regions, with missiles reaching Ukraine's westernmost part. SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena joins us now via our telephone line for more on this conversation. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. Perhaps let's start off here. What do we know so far?
What has just been reported is that the President of the United States of America, the outgoing leader, has given approval that Ukraine can use the U.S. long-range weapons. You know that Zelenskyy has been requesting the NATO member countries, particularly the United States of America, to allow him to use the long-range missiles, because then he will be able to hit Russia and inside Russia. And there has been a movement towards refusing, but finally today the President of the United States of America, the breaking news that he has given permission for Zelenskyy to use those weapons. And therefore, this brings us to a very, very delicate moment, because there's no way Russia is going to just pull back and watch. And you know how strong is Russia in terms of military capability. We also know that the other countries that are supportive of Russia are also on standby, including North Korea. And you're talking about a country, Russia, with also very powerful caliber weapons in terms of even the nuclear capability. So this is quite sensitive, and I think many people are worried as we speak, particularly in Europe, in terms of how this is going to play itself. And also, you know that as we speak, you have a big UN conference not very far from Russia, where you have COP29 in Azerbaijan. On the other hand, you have the G20 meeting in Brazil. And as we speak, we saw that President Biden will be visiting the Amazon forest ahead of the G20 tomorrow. And I can tell you, this is now going to dominate the G20 summit. I think the South is very angry with this announcement just ahead of the G20, because it is going to derail the meeting, and the journalists are now going to chase leaders to get reaction. The Secretary General of the UN is supposed to address the media now. In fact, I was waiting to hear what he's going to say. I can tell you the first question from the media will be his reaction to this announcement. And therefore, the whole agenda of even the G20 now is going to be drowned by a decision taken by Joe Biden on the eve of such an important meeting.
And Sophie, what do you think prompted this decision, particularly from the US president?
Clearly, Joe Biden is almost a lame duck. He's on his way out, but he still has power, because he is still the president of the United States of America until mid-January, when he leaves office and Donald Trump comes in. Currently, Donald Trump is president-elect. He can't give the troops or the soldiers, or he's not a commander-in-chief. Joe Biden is still a commander-in-chief, and therefore he can take any decisions in terms of military wear, in terms of who he can supply arms to, who he can support. He's still in charge in terms of decisions that must be taken by America in relation to NATO and its allies, and therefore he's doing this. For me, I think he is almost on his way out. He couldn't stop the war in Ukraine, and therefore he wants to salvage his legacy. And unfortunately, because Russia did attack in recent times Ukraine with long-range missiles also, as you heard earlier on, even Donald Trump asking President Putin to hold back, I think he's now using those attacks as perhaps a reason he gave Ukraine the right to use the U.S. long-range weapons. But I can tell you it has got nothing to do with this, but it has to do with trying to salvage his legacy. And we've seen the leaders of the United States of America, all of them, when you look at their history, you will see that on their way out, they take such decisions, and the world then remain with all the troubles. Look at Iraq, look at Libya, and these are the decisions that were taken by the leaders of the United States of America on their way out. And now he has done the same. The question is, what can we expect in terms of his next move in relation to the Middle East? Because even there, he would want to try and undo the damage. But how is he going to do it? And I think one person who will be very angry will be the president of Brazil, Lula, who now has to deal with the media frenzy around this, because now it's the top story, a headline in all the international networks.
And Sophie, if, Donald Trump, who has since been elected as the U.S. president, if he was in charge, would we see, such action coming out from the U.S.?
You can't predict. A president of the United States of America will always be a president of the U.S. for U.S. and NATO sometimes, even though we know that Trump is not in favor of how NATO is been conducting its business and support from other countries. It's a burden to the U.S. And he has a different view. I don't know. I think one can trust what he said, because you may characterize Donald Trump the way you want to characterize him. But one thing, when he says something, he does exactly that. And he had promised that he was going to engage the two sides with the intention to ensure that that war doesn't continue. So I think knowing Donald Trump, having covered Donald Trump in the last term, you'd recall when he was president, we know what he did at that time, trying to even reaching out to what many would allege are despots of the world in the maintenance of peace. And he has positioned himself as a president of the global peace, and he was going to engage the two. But in politics, you can't really be, precise in terms of what a leader might do. The same with the Middle East. He has promised, he has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that that war must end before he gets into office. You'd recall he said this before he was elected, saying, if I get elected, before I get into office, that Middle East conflict must be resolved. And therefore, he is perhaps doing something, because much as he's president-elect, he is already interacting with world leaders. That is why many have congratulated him, and he had telephone calls to some of these leaders. Some of them reached out to him even before elections, because they could see where this thing was going. And therefore, that's the global politics and diplomacy. So it doesn't mean when he's not in office, he doesn't engage. And I am waiting to see what will be his reaction based on what President Joe Biden has just announced a few minutes ago. And at the same time, he's taking walkabouts at the Amazon forest in Brazil. And now we expect this massive announcement to have a serious implications or perhaps consequences either to Ukraine or to Russia, and that will affect many countries around the world.
All right, Sophie, thank you so much for that update. That's SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena just giving us the latest developments there from that story. US President Joe Biden giving the green light for Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia.